I'm always fascinated by somebody who has trouble reading as a child who then goes on to become a novelist. I had read a really traumatic story that you had when you're in your first grade classroom. Everybody has there's a poster with all the names, and every time they finish reading,
Yeah,
there's a star next to it, and you only had the one star.
yeah. So this is my first grade class, Mrs. Brooks, who was, by the way, an amazingly good teacher. Um, and I remember her well from first grade, and that was a very long time ago. But we had reading, we read in class all the time, and I was a very slow reader, and it frustrated me beyond no end. And we had a poster on the wall, and on the poster was everyone's name, and every time you read a book, you got a star, and you put the star next to your name, and it was a way to keep track and brag and show off about all the books that you had read. But for me, for someone who struggled to read books, it was the like I avoided that part of the classroom because it 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 hurt to see how far behind I was. And I had a good friend across the table from me, and she was an incredible reader, and her you know her line was filled with stars. You know, it looked like the Hubble telescope took a picture of the galaxy, and there was just stars everywhere. And my line, I always say, looked like the flag of Texas, the Lone Star State. I had one star for the year, and when I got that star, I was so excited that I finally had one. And when I got to the poster, put it up, I was just embarrassed because then it's like, oh, I only got one. And so, really, at the end of first grade, I kind of made a mental note to stop trying to read, and that put me behind in life for quite some time because I kept to that. I read very little, almost never for pleasure. The thought of reading an entire novel just baffled me. And now when I look at the ones that I write, first of all, I can't believe that I write books and my friends think it's hilarious that I write books. But second, I can't believe how long my books are because I'm like, think about you as a kid. You are not writing for you, even though the plots and the stories that I write are the ones that I would have wanted to have read when I was younger. So that's a battle I have with myself about book length. But yeah, so writing was not a real great thing for me. Um, and then in college, I went on a blind date, and I'm on this blind date with this girl who's wonderful and pretty and smart and funny and nice and everything you could want. You know, the whole point of a blind date is to get to the second date, right? You want to try to, well, maybe this goes well, we could have another one, and then the second one, and so she, about 30 minutes in, said, oh, I love to read. Do you like to read? And I'm like, well, I can't really hit her with well, in first grade, I really struggled. There's this poster, and they start. So I lied, which is, I am really not a liar, not just because of virtue, because I can't keep things straight. So I just always tell the truth, but I lied. I said, oh, I love to read. I really love to read. But we started dating. So we started dating. So I didn't want to admit that I lied on our first date. So I would carry around a book, and I do all that. And now we've been married for over 30 years. And you know, once she was really fully committed, I said, on our first date, I said I like to read, but I may have stretched the truth a bit on that. And she's like, yeah, the fact that you've been reading the same book for a couple of years was kind of a dead giveaway. Because she reads a book a week, 2 books a week sometimes, and she's a school teacher during vacation. It's like every other day just to keep up with her book habit. So it was a long journey, and it is really the only real regret of my life is that 7-year-old me made a decision that even teenage me followed, which was I'm just not going to try reading. I'm just going to stay away from it. And I have a lot of friends who are writers who are really good, and many of them very well known writers. And we'll get together and we'll talk, and everything's great until they start talking about all the books that they loved as kids, and then I just disappear from the conversation and I listen because I can't contribute. For me, it was movies. For me, I started going to movies. My mom loved the movies. The movie theater was the only place I was allowed to go by myself growing up. And so I would go to the movies, and a movie is 2 hours long for everyone, or an hour and a half for everyone. And I fell in love with that storytelling, and I started making movies growing up. And then I knew that that's what I wanted to do, was work in film or television, and really that sent me on that course. But books were always secretly kind of pulling me back, and I am happier now writing books than I have ever been with any part of my career.
That is the best reading or best reason I think I've ever heard for wanting to become a reader is to impress somebody you're attracted to.
Yes, no, it was important, and she is fantastic, and she is, you know, yeah, it's great, and she, also bonus, she reads everything I write as I write it, so she's the first editor of everything. So it was a win-win that date for me. It was very good.
So if you don't go on that date, maybe I'm not talking to you today. Maybe
You
you're
are
doing.
definitely not talking to me. You are definitely not talking to me if I hadn't gone on that date.
So I'm curious because I'd also read that you had decided to become a writer when you're in Mr. Prothero's fifth grade English class, but you're not reading. So what is it that made you want to be a writer in fifth grade?
Okay, here's the weird thing. I wasn't reading books, right? I would read things like Sports Illustrated. I'd read things like, greatest receivers in the NFL. I love the World Almanac. Every year I would get a new version. So I liked, what I had trouble with was that narrative content storyline carried out. I'm petting my dog. I'm trying to secretly pet my dog so she doesn't bark. So that if you notice any weird twitches with my left arm, she is, as always, taking advantage of one of these sessions. Um, so I loved books, and some books I did read. There were a couple that slipped through the cracks. One was still to this day my favorite book of all time, which is From the Mixed Up Files of Mrs. Baisley, Frank Weiler. And that was a book that I loved, and it had a mystery in it, had real setting in it, and I managed to make it through. And then there were these books called Encyclopedia Brown, and Encyclopedia Brown books would be, they were narrow volumes, and you'd order them out of the Weekly Reader, and you'd get there'd be like 6 or 7 mysteries in one book, each of them about 9 pages long. So I could keep with that. So I wasn't reading, and I wasn't usually enjoying reading. And my reading, I do great on all my tests except for reading comprehension. I struggled with that, but I always was writing. I would write things that were longer than what I was reading because I just love stories. I would. The first story I ever wrote was in second grade. I wrote a story about Mickey Mouse's birthday and how all the characters chipped in and bought him a lamp. It's a very strange decision for an 8-year-old to make, but I loved writing stories. My mom did a little bit of writing, and she loved storytelling. At my house, I was the youngest, and you know the way you got noticed at the dinner table or something else is you tell a funny story. Say something funny or tell an interesting story. And so storytelling was always a thing for me. And it was the writing of poetry in Mr. Prothero's class in fifth grade that flicked the switch of like, no, no, no. Because the response from that made me want to, yeah, I want to feel that more. So I have to figure out what writing is right for me, because writing is it. That same year, I went to really a life-changing movie for me, and it was All the President's Men, which is not a movie that most 10-year-olds were into when it came out. It's a movie about Watergate and the two reporters, Woodward and Bernstein from the Washington Post, who uncovered Watergate. And what I loved about the movie was that for years, and if you're not my age, you don't remember any of this or don't know of any of this, all you heard was the word Watergate, and it never made sense to me. What is this place? What is going on? And the president may have to resign and all like this. And then I saw this movie, and in 2 hours, I understood it all. And I thought, oh, a really well-told story is the thing that helps you see the world better and helps you understand better. So this combination of this great teacher and writing poetry in his class, and poetry was great because it was short enough that I could really do the whole thing, gave me a sense of word and word selection and rhythm and pace and that. And then a story about writers. So it was twofold. It was not only a story where the written script and story of the movie explained the things to me, but it was about that, oh, the heroes of this movie are the people who write the stories. And I thought, okay, so writing is the thing for me. And then my quest from fifth grade to 12th grade was figuring out what type of writing. What I want to be. For a long time, I thought I might want to be a journalist, probably and partly inspired by the Woodward and Bernstein thing, but it's like just newspaper writing is short and concise, or magazine writing. Okay, I like that. or I might want to write TV shows because I love television, or I might want to write movies. So I love, and so I banged around with all that. So even though I wasn't reading like the other people, I was appreciating story. And a couple real turning points along the way. I had a middle school teacher who was amazing. Dale Tyree was his name. I had him all 3 years for English. And in his class, and he was from Indiana, like you. And Mr. Tyree would have us make movies in class. And every year, each grade would make the movie. And every year, I wrote our movie for my class. And I turned to him once and I said, I think this is what I want to do. Because writing scripts feels so right to me. I think I want to write movies or TV shows. And then I just said, or plays, because I love the idea of plays. And I'll never forget what he did. He looked at me and he said, write a play, James. If you write a play, we'll produce it at school. And it was the most amazing thing because he didn't ask my parents, my mom, he didn't ask my principal, he didn't ask anyone. He just said, on the spot, write a play and we'll produce it for the school. And I said, okay. And so I wrote the worst Christmas play in the history of mankind. I mean, it was unbelievably awful and inappropriate. The fact that this is put on at a school, a public school, it is just now, but it was about Santa's sleigh being taken hostage by terrorists. And it involved at one point, there are machine guns. There's a fist fight between an elf and the Ayatollah Khomeini. I played Jimmy Carter in the play. We had all these things, and it was just really silly humor. And true to his word, we produced it for the school. And one day we sat in the cafetorium and on the stage, and we kept doing this stupid play that I had written. There's my dog finally giving up, walking away, showing me what she thinks of her. And I sat in the wings because Jimmy Carter only had 1 or 2 lines. I was not a good actor ever. So I was in the wings and I just sat there and I watched the kids in the auditorium watching the play. And they would laugh at my stupid jokes. And I thought, yeah, this is it. So it got to the point that when I was in college, when I was a senior in high school, and my family had no money. So I was going to be a scholarship kid at whatever school I went to. And I applied to 3 schools. I got into all 3, and it was going to come down to the financial aid. And it was basically down to if I went to the University of Florida, I was going to major in journalism. That if I went to Northwestern, I was going to major in journalism or try to get into playwriting. And if I went to USC, I was going to major in screenwriting. And USC came through with the great financial aid offer and scholarships, and that's where I went. So it was really, I'd like to say I decided, but in the end, finances decided which path I was going to choose once I got there, but I knew it was going to be writing. And interestingly, none of those were English or going to write novels. That was the thing. And it was an anxious time in my house in the spring semester of my senior year. Not only was I leaving the town that I knew my whole life, and my mom was moving the day after I graduated from high school, but I was like, career paths were wide open, as they probably should be at that. I still decided probably at too young an age, but I knew I wanted to write.
Well, now that you've got all of these great Hollywood film and television contacts, why are the wheels not turning to get this Santa sleigh being attacked by terrorists movie made?
I rightfully did not save any copies of that, so we would have to start from scratch. Yeah, it was in tune with what then became very popular, which were these silly Naked Gun comedies or other like just slapsticky kind of anything can happen things. But yeah. I know it wasn't a sincere question, but I look back on that thing and I just can't believe. But it's so what it tells me is how important it is for students to get not just positive response and criticism, but encouragement to do things. And, first of all, him stopping English class for us to make a movie was a pretty bold move for a teacher to make. On top of that, to say, okay, James, you're going to do this, we're going to do that. Worst case scenario, that took up 2 weeks of English class to memorize the play and build the sets and do all that stuff. And I know with the way that we have with standards and testings now, it couldn't happen. But boy, did that change my life.
We are recording this January 11th, so of course we just had the holidays. Watched a bunch of Christmas movies right up to the big day. Watched the Santa Claus and watched the Die Hard, and now I'm thinking just cram those two together.
It is Santa Claus and Die Hard, decades before either of those came to be. Those movies came, but yeah. So maybe I was ahead of my time, and I just did not realize it.
There's still time. If everyone's listening to this, like, oh my God, I would definitely pay to see that. We can make this happen. And I've always wondered, a brief divergent thought about Bob Woodward. Mr. Woodward, if you're listening, please come on the show. I'll ask you this question directly. But I've always wondered, since he was sneaking around, meeting with Deep Throat to uncover Watergate, and it looked like quite a bit of work, quite an impressive feat. And then flash forward all these years later, when he's writing Rage and some of his other novels, and he's literally talking to the president on the phone, and the president is openly confessing to crimes. I always want to ask him, do you get bored? Do you feel like later life wasn't as challenging as it was when you started your career?
That's a great thought, but the truth is probably, and not just with that president, with any president, you're going to get more accurate information from Deep Throat in the garage than you are from the mouth of the person.